Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best junglers right now for patch 6.12. So my list is actually a little bit different from the last time I did one. I think it was back in 6.10. Ghost did get a buff, and Trinity Force also did get a change to it, so that has altered my list a little bit, and it has brought a few new champions onto the list. So with that being said guys, let's get into the video. So first up is going to be Khazix. Right now, I think that Khazix is probably your best bet for a damaged jungler, maybe other than Kindred. He's got a really strong early game. If you are going up against a weaker early game jungler like an Amumu or someone that you can just easily kill at level 2 or level 3, then definitely look to go for an invade with him, because if you can get that first kill on the enemy jungler, or if you can get that first kill when ganking, then you can just snowball really hard with Khazix. He's got great assassination potential as well. If you do catch out the enemy jungler, you're basically guaranteed to win the 1v1, and once you do get to the mid to late game, you can practically one-shot the enemy AD carry or the enemy mid laner if you do get them isolated and you get your full combo off. The stealth with his ultimate is really nice too for team fighting. You can just pop your ultimate after you do end up jumping in, and because it does give you the stealth, if the enemies don't have a pink ward, then you can jump in, assassinate your target, pop your ultimate, and then just get out. A few cons to Khazix are that he is a pretty squishy jungler. If your team is lacking a tank in the top lane and for support, then I would not pick him in that situation, and he is also pretty snowball reliant in the early game. Next up is going to be Ventibear. So Ventibear is probably one of the easiest, most simplest, low risk, high reward junglers right now. He's just got a really easy kit. What you want to do on Voli pretty much every time is just look for a flash flip if you are in a team fight, and when you are ganking, his combo is just so easy. You just go in with your Q active, you flip them, you get the slow off on them, and then you just auto attack them to death. So I think that if you're either new to jungle or if you're just looking for an easy jungle pick, then I would play Voli for sure. He does a lot of damage while still building pretty much full tank. You don't even need to go a single damage item on Voli, and because of your W, you can just deal so much damage in mid to late game team fights. He also does have pretty good crowd control with his Q and his W. His clears are really strong as well, mainly because of his E. His E ability fears the camp, so this is just really strong for clearing in the early game, and he is definitely one of the strongest junglers when it does come to clearing the jungle. He's pretty good at all stages of the game too. He's got a solid early game. If the enemy jungler or the enemy laners do try to duel you in the early game, then if you're in a 2v2 or if you're in a 1v1, you're probably going to win that a lot of the time, because you do have your passive and you do have pretty good early game damage. And a few cons to Voli are that he can get kited pretty easily, which is why I haven't really liked him a whole lot in the past. But right now I think that because Cinderhulk is a really good item and because he's just a fairly easy champion to play, I think he is still good even though he can get kited pretty easily. And he is also pretty predictable. When you are playing Voli, you just want to look for that flash flip engage, and if the enemy team is smart, then they'll just play a little bit further back and they won't allow you to go for that. Next up is going to be Hecarim. So Hecarim is one of the junglers who did benefit from the Ghost and Trinity Force changes. Right now Ghost is on only a 150 second cooldown if you do take the mastery that reduces your cooldowns by 15%. So this is really strong on Hecarim because it means once every 2.5 minutes you can pull off a really strong gank, because if you pop your Ghost as Hecarim and you have your E active, if the enemies are pushed to around halfway and you come in from behind, they're pretty much not going to escape you, especially if you do have red buff and you do have chilling smite. The amount of movement speed you have and the amount of sticking power you have with your chilling smite will just allow you to pick up really easy kills. So when you are playing Hecarim, whenever your Ghost is off cooldown, then look to gank, because if you're saving your Ghost and you're not using it very often, then I really don't think that's the way that you should be playing Hecarim. You should be using your Ghost on cooldown and using it to pull off successful ganks in the early game. He is great at all stages of the game too. He scales pretty well into the mid to late game because he's got great engage with his ultimate, and he does do quite a bit of damage while only building 1 or 2 damage items. I usually do like to go for Warrior and then Trinity Force on Hecarim, and after that I go full tank, and you can still like solo the enemy AD carry really easily, and you can deal a lot of damage in those mid to late game team fights. He's got really good clears in the jungle too, because he's got the AoE damage coming out from his Q and his W, and his sustain in the jungle is also quite nice due to his W. A few cons to Hecarim are that he can be invaded in the early game if the enemy jungler is smart. Because Hecarim does not take flash, if the enemy jungler does have the advantage on him, then he's pretty much not going to escape, especially if the enemy jungler does have some sort of gap closer or some sort of crowd control ability. And he is also pretty weak if he does fall behind, since he's a jungler who wants to be looking for engages, he wants to dive on the back line, and if he doesn't have his items, then he's not really going to be able to do that. Next up is going to be another jungler who did benefit from these Ghost and Trinity Force changes, and that jungler is Skarner. So right now, I feel like Skarner is probably the most underrated jungler in the game, but he's just such a strong pick right now with the changes to Ghost and Trinity Force. When I'm playing Skarner right now, I like to go for the same build that I go for with Hecarim, which is the Warrior into Trinity Force, and the amount of damage you can do with just those two items and then building full tank after is just absolutely crazy. You pretty much want to play Skarner how you play Hecarim. Whenever your Ghost is off cooldown, then look to be ganking, especially when you do hit level 6. Skarner's ganks at level 6 are pretty much foolproof because you've got your ultimate. If you pop your Ghost, then the enemies are probably not going to be able to escape from you. And then after that, if you still need more crowd control, you have your E, which will provide the slow and the stun. So overall, Skarner's ganks are just really effective, especially if he does have Ghost. He does have the movement speed buff with his W2, so he's just got so much movement speed, and it's so hard to catch a Skarner out in a mid to late game teamfight when he's got his Ghost popped and he's got his W active. He does have the shield on his W2, which allows him to stay pretty healthy in the jungle when he is clearing. And a few cons to Skarner, or one con to him, is that he is countered by disengage. If the enemy team does lock someone like a Janna or a Gragas, then in that situation, Skarner may not be the best pick because it will be harder for you to get onto that back line. And to round out my top 5, I have Kindred. So Kindred is still a really strong pick for solo queue in my opinion, even though she has been receiving some nerfs recently. She is a ranged jungler, so she does have the advantage in a lot of matchups. If she is going up against a melee jungler who does not have a gap closer, she's got really good kite too with the slow on her E, and her Q is also on a really short cooldown if she does have her W down. She does have great clears in the early game and throughout the game because she does have AoE damage coming out from her Q, and she can also kite the camps really nicely because of the mobility she does have with her Q. She does have pretty good ganks too. You'd think that a jungler without a strong crowd control ability wouldn't have the best ganks, but if you do have red buff and you do pop your E off on the opponent, then you can definitely look to have some great early game pressure with Kindred. Her ultimate is really good as well. It's one of those abilities that can win you a game, but it can also lose you the game if you do use it in the wrong situation. However, I think that once you do get used to Kindred and you get used to timing your ultimate and using it in the correct situations, it can be a very game-changing ability. And she does also scale pretty well into the late game because of her passive. A few cons to Kindred are that she is a pretty squishy jungler. If your team is lacking a tank in the top lane and for support, then I would not pick her in that situation. And she also does not have any strong crowd control. First up on the honorable mentions is going to be Zac. So every time I've played against a Zac these past few patches, he's been able to carry really hard and he's been able to snowball the early game just out of control. His ganks in the early game are really strong because he's got his E ability, which is a really long range gap closer, which also provides the knockup, so you can gank from places where a lot of other junglers can't gank from, and this just makes him really effective in the early game. If you can get a good snowball going with Zac in the early game, then it can just be really easy for you to close out the game because you do have super long range engage with your E, and that's one of the main reasons I just really hate playing against Zac. It's so hard to ward against him because he can just engage from the lane where you're probably not going to end up putting wards down, and that just makes him a really strong pick in my opinion. The Spirit Visage also did get a buff a few patches ago, and Cinderhulk also got buffed, so those are another two reasons as to why Zac is a pretty strong pick right now. Next up is going to be Szechuan E. So like Zach, Szechuan E is also a pretty strong pick because of the Cinderhulk buffs recently. We are also seeing quite a few more assassin or more champions in the top lane who aren't going to be building tank. So if your team does have someone like an Aurelia top lane or a Swain or someone who is going to go for a more damage build, then I would recommend picking someone like a Szechuan E or a Zach so that your team does have some good tank and some good crowd control for those mid to late game team fights. Next up, I have Khazix. So Khazix is a pretty strong overall jungler. He does have great crowd control in his kit with his Q, his E, and his ultimate. His ganks in the early game are really effective too. The one thing you need to get down as Khazix to be able to play him to his fullest potential though is to get the Flash E combo. For some reason, I just haven't been able to get this combo down, and I don't know if it's just because I haven't played enough Khazix or I'm just not using it correctly. But once you do learn the Flash E combo, your ganks just become that much stronger and you can really get a good snowball going in the early game with him. Next up is going to be Rek'Sai. So personally, I haven't been a huge fan of Rek'Sai in the past. She does have a very strong early game and she can definitely get a good snowball going, but I just feel like once you do get to the mid to late game, she is a little bit weaker than some of the other junglers since she doesn't provide the best crowd control, and she will definitely get outscaled by other junglers like Szechuan E or Zach who do have good crowd control and they also do have pretty good damage. So in my opinion, she is great if you can do well in the early game, but if you don't have a strong early game on her, then she will get outskilled by some of the other junglers. Next up is going to be Elise. So like Rek'Sai, Elise does have a great early game. If you can get a good snowball going with Elise, then you can just end the game before the 25-minute point really easily on her a lot of the time. Her cocoon is her main ability that she needs to hit to be successful though. So if you haven't played a whole lot of Elise, then definitely practice her in normal games before heading into ranked, because your cocoon is a very strong ability if you can hit it, but I see a lot of Elise players just not being able to hit it consistently, and if you can't hit it consistently, then you might as well just play one of the other junglers on my list. And to round out the honorable mentions, guys, I have Amumu. So Amumu has been a really strong pick for solo queue for pretty much forever. I really can't remember back to when Amumu wasn't a strong pick in the jungle. He's got great crowd control with his ultimate. His team fighting is really strong. So if you're just looking for a strong crowd control tank champion, then I would play Amumu for sure. So that is going to round out this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.